Greetings, WHAP warriors. We are continuing our virtual and hybrid learning. This is not ideal to be teaching you and giving you slideshow and stories from a remote setting, but alas, this is what we need to do in order to move forward, and so I will get started. Today's mini lesson, and I say mini lesson because I'm condensing essentially what I'd take a day to go over, from the slideshow and stories to looking at primary resources, down into about 10 minutes or so. Today we want to talk about the French Revolution, and the French Revolution falls under the umbrella of our learning goal, which is to students will understand and be able to explain the Atlantic Revolution 1750 to 1900. We talked about the American Revolution. We talked about how the Enlightenment had affected the ideas that went into crafting the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, and inspiring the patriots of the American Revolution to fight for independence. And the question remains, to what extent did the Atlantic revolutions achieve their goals? And so today we will be looking at the French Revolution, and so bear with me as I take you through some of the main points of the French Revolution. Where we need to start is with the French royalty and what France looked like before the revolution broke out. In France, France was an absolute monarchy. And no one perhaps characterizes an absolute monarchy greater than Louis XIV. Louis XIV, the Sun King, who is pictured in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, 1638 to 1715, was the poster boy for an absolute monarchy. He built away from 14 miles away from Paris, the Palace of Versailles, which is an elaborate, opulent, wide, far-spreading complex that was meant to get the absolute monarch, Louis XIV, the Sun King as he nicknamed himself, and his court away from Paris. Now, you might think, why would you want to get away from Paris? Paris is delightful. Well, it is now, but Paris at the time, as were most European cities, was densely populated, narrow streets, crowded, unsanitary in many regards. And so Louis XIV moved his court out to Versailles, where he enjoyed opulent parties and the visits of dignitaries, and essentially moved him away from the everyday people of France. Now, a couple of generations later, King Louis XVI, 1754 to 1793, in the tradition of these absolute monarchs, is going to live at Versailles, and he is going to live departed from French reality at the time, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. He's going to marry an Austrian princess named Marie Antoinette, and Marie Antoinette, a part of this upper echelon of European royalty, is going to be, for lack of a better term, the poster girl for opulent parties, conspicuous consumption. She is going to have these elaborate hairstyles and the best and finest attire, and they're going to bring in food and drinks that the French commoners and even French middle class bourgeoisie couldn't even imagine eating during this time period. And they're going to live in luxury while people starve and the economy flounders in France. And so Marie Antoinette, to especially to the women, are going to women of France, is going to symbolize kind of what is wrong in France, and Louis XVI is going to symbolize the ineptitude of the royalty, as well as the opulence and the conspicuous consumption. Now, the French Revolution, and again, I'm hitting the main points here, but the French Revolution, French society for that matter, is going to hit an inflection point in 1789. The French, as I mentioned, are going to get involved on the side of the American patriots during the American War for Independence. Why? Largely because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Not to get too deep into it, but siding with the Americans is going to allow them to stick it to the British, and but that is going to be costly, and it's going to compound an already floundering economy, and common everyday people in France are going to have trouble feeding their families. And as was a large part of the diet in France, as is other parts of Europe, was bread. And so when you struggle to put bread on the table, and you are a bourgeoisie or sans-culotte, please forgive my terrible French pronunciation, it's going to be problematic. And it's going to spill over in 1789. When the Ancien Regime was the three estates, essentially the social class pyramid, essentially, that we see in every society that we study. The first estate is the clergy, the church members, your bishops, your cardinals, your priests. The second estate is your nobility, your landowners, and your royalty. And your third estate is everyone else, which represented 95% of the population. And the third estate included the sans-culotte, which means without breeches. These are your common everyday kind of artisans and dock workers and people who, kind of your working class. And then you have your bourgeoisie, your middle class, your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers, your clerks, merchants, and then peasants. Everybody else, a large part of the French society. And these three estates would symbolically gather from time to time, infrequently, as a body politic to pass laws or to ratify laws or taxes under the guise of some sort of consent of the governed at the calling of the royalty. And so in 1789, King Louis XVI is going to call a meeting of the Estates General to basically rubber stamp taxes for the Third Estate that is going to help pay for debt from the French and Indian War, as well as involvement in the American Revolution. And when they come together, it's interesting because the First Estate, there's going to be over 100 clergy that are going to come together. I think there's close to 250 nobility that are going to come and represent the nobility at this Estates General meeting. And then the Third Estate is going to have around 600. Well, you would think that the 600 will be able to outvote the clergy and the nobility, but that is not the case. Essentially, each estate had one vote, okay? And in this case, the clergy and nobility are always going to outvote the Third Estate, which, I don't have to tell you, very unfair. And this is going to begin the French Revolution. 1789, there's going to be bread riots. Mothers, commoners are going to be very upset over the unavailability of flour and bread to feed their families. When the Estates General, meanwhile, when the Estates General is called together, there's going to be a disruption. The king is going to essentially disrupt the meeting of the Third Estate, and so the Third Estate says, to heck with it. We're going to, even though our area that we've been meeting in has been kind of, for lack of a better term, disrupted, we're going to go outside, we're going to meet at this tennis court oath, and we're going to swear that we're not going to leave here until we, as a body, meet and kind of author a Declaration of the Rights of Man, essentially, remove ourselves from this Estates General and form our own government. The storming of the Bastille comes soon after, on July 14th, 1789. The storming of the Bastille is a symbolic storming of this prison that holds political prisoners, as well as arms, armament, and gunpowder. The National Assembly forms and ends the legal privilege of the clergy and nobility, and this all takes place in rapid fire during the summer months of 1789, ending the privilege and power of the clergy and nobility. And again, we could go very much deeper into this, and I will encourage you to, and I'll give you the resources to, but one thing is for certain, that the royalty was in peril. In 1793 and 1794, the Reign of Terror begins. The king and the queen had been moved, basically forced back into Paris to abandon Versailles, and symbolically moved back under the watchful eye of the National Assembly into Paris. The Reign of Terror begins under this leader, this lawyer, Maximilien Robespierre, who is going to lead the Committee on Public Safety, which is essentially this group of folks who are in support of and become more radical as time presses on, the French Revolution. The Reign of Terror is going to be a time period where 20,000 plus are executed by way of guillotine, which is a mechanism that is supposed to be an egalitarian form of execution by way of this large, essentially the national razor, as they called it, this large, heavy blade that falls, 15 to 20 feet once a lever is pulled to lop off the heads of the unlucky political opponents. 20,000 are executed by way of guillotine, and this Reign of Terror is going to also see the execution of royalty. The king and the queen are going to be beheaded publicly, which was shocking to the rest of Europe, shocking to the royalty of Europe, and it's going to cause war. France is going to be embroiled with war on its borders and abroad. The king and the queen, they actually try to escape one night with their son, and they get stopped at the Austrian border, just before the border, by a French night watchman. He comes out and he sees that it's the king and the queen and the Dauphin, the son, the prince, and they get shipped back to Paris, and angrily they are put to death soon after, publicly, as I said. And this again is a flashpoint of the revolution where no one was safe. I mean, up until that point, publicly executing a king or a queen, very much unheard of. But the problem with the revolution, the French Revolution, is that it ate its own, essentially. Maximilien Robespierre becomes too inflammatory. Him and his friends, like a Jean-Paul Marat, are going to essentially target people all across France. And really, this Reign of Terror, no one was safe. And what eventually happens is Maximilien Robespierre, who orders, or at least is a part of ordering the deaths of thousands of people publicly by guillotine, eventually he is seen as an enemy of the state. And for the Reign of Terror to end, he needs to publicly be put to death. And so essentially the police, the law enforcement, they come for Maximilien Robespierre. He finds out that they are coming. He tries to commit suicide. He takes his pistol and he goes to shoot himself, but he misses, essentially, and shoots off his jaw. They storm down the door. They find him, with his jaw essentially hanging there. Sorry to be graphic, but they bandage him up. They make him wait the night, and then the next day they put him to death. It's a symbolic end to the Reign of Terror, and so the man who is largely responsible for the Reign of Terror is summarily executed in public, and the Reign of Terror begins to end, but not without great terror across the French countryside. And as you can see, as we will continue next week, we will talk about the ascension of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte, after a decade long of instability and a change of leadership, towards the end of the 1790s, Napoleon Bonaparte is going to rise through the ranks of the French army, and he's going to come to power. He's going to come to be a dictator for life, eventually the emperor. He is going to lead France into a series of successful battles in land wars in Europe, but eventually he's going to make the ultimate mistake, which we will talk about next week, which is invading Russia during the cold winter months. And we'll talk about that again. I hope you have a great day and appreciate you sticking with me. Make sure you read and you continue filling your deep well of historical knowledge, and I will provide extra resources so you can read a little bit more on these particular events. Have a great day.